It all began on a quiet Monday morning in the Clarke mansion, a place where elegance was routine and silence was wealth. Sunlight slid through the tall glass windows, painting gold on marble floors. Everything was in its perfect place, polished, refined, distant. But something was about to change in that house, something that would disturb even the most well-kept corners of its perfection. Ryan Clarke, the only son of the Clarke family, sat at the breakfast table scrolling through his phone, half listening to the faint hum of the city outside. He was 27, handsome, composed, but tired of a life that looked flawless on the outside but felt hollow on the inside. Every day was a repeat of yesterday. Same table, same meals, same conversations that never meant much. And then, that morning, the door opened. She walked in quietly, holding a tray of freshly baked muffins. She was new, clearly nervous, her eyes lowered as if afraid to meet anyone's gaze. Her name was Anna. She was the new cook Mrs. Clarke had hired only the night before, after the previous one resigned abruptly. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't confidence that filled the room. It was gentleness. Something so rare in that house that even the silence seemed to pause to listen. Ryan lifted his head. For a moment, he didn't move. He simply looked at her, the soft waves of her brown hair tied back, the small traces of flour still on her apron, and the sincerity in her face that didn't belong to a world of wealth and appearances. She was beautiful, yes, but not in the polished, magazine way his mother's world demanded. Her beauty was real, unguarded, honest, human. Mrs. Clarke entered the room just then, the echo of her heels cutting through the warmth like cold air. "Anna," she said sharply, "the silverware is polished before breakfast, not after. I expect precision in this house." Anna nodded immediately, lowering her head again. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry." Ryan frowned slightly, glancing between the two women. His mother, elegant and strict, had ruled this house with quiet iron for years. And Anna, she looked so out of place in her simple uniform, her hands trembling slightly as she set the tray down. But when she smiled shyly and offered him a muffin, something inside him shifted. "Thank you," he said, and for the first time that morning he smiled too. Over the following days, Anna became a quiet rhythm in Ryan's life. He started noticing her presence, the smell of her cooking that filled the kitchen with warmth, the faint hum of her voice when she thought no one was listening, the way she looked out the window as if dreaming of something beyond the tall hedges and stone walls. He found excuses to be around, asking about recipes, complimenting dishes he never used to care about, lingering near the kitchen under the pretense of work calls. But every time she turned and smiled, he forgot what he was supposed to say. Anna, for her part, noticed him too. She had heard stories about Ryan Clarke, the charming, handsome heir who had everything. But the man she met was different. There was a sadness behind his easy smile, a quiet loneliness that mirrored her own. And even though she tried to keep her distance, their worlds began to overlap in ways neither expected. One rainy afternoon, the power went out in the mansion. The storm outside was fierce, and the staff had left early. Anna was in the kitchen lighting candles when Ryan walked in, his hair slightly damp, holding a flashlight. "Seems like it's just us," he said, half smiling. She looked up at him, her eyes glowing in the flicker of candlelight. "I guess so." They laughed softly, the kind of laugh that comes from relief, two souls recognizing each other in a dark room. She offered him a bowl of soup, and they sat together by the counter, the rain drumming against the windows. For the first time, they talked, really talked. Anna told him about her life, about growing up in a small town, about her mother who taught her to cook, about her dreams of one day owning a small bakery. Ryan listened intently, fascinated not by the words, but by the sincerity in them. When it was his turn, he hesitated. No one ever asked him about his dreams, only his responsibilities, his business ventures, the Clarke legacy he was meant to protect. But with her, he found himself speaking freely. "I don't even know if any of this makes me happy anymore," he admitted quietly. "Sometimes it feels like I'm living someone else's life." Anna's eyes softened. Maybe you just need to live for yourself for once. Her words lingered in the air, heavy and true. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, something silent and irreversible began. Over the next weeks, something bloomed between them quietly, carefully. Ryan started coming home earlier, finding reasons to stay near the kitchen. Anna, despite her efforts to remain professional, couldn't hide the way her heart raced whenever he entered the room. Their conversations became longer, their glances lingered. Every moment felt like a secret, but secrets in the Clarke house never lasted long. One evening, Mrs. Clarke returned earlier than expected from a charity dinner. She walked into the kitchen and found Ryan and Anna laughing over a spilled bowl of frosting. There was flour on Ryan's shirt, laughter in the air, and a warmth in his eyes she hadn't seen in years. "Ryan," she said coldly. "A word." He froze, his smile fading as he followed her into the hall. The conversation that followed was sharp and unforgiving. "You will not embarrass this family with some servant girl," Mrs. Clarke said, her voice calm but full of venom. "Do you understand what that would look like? What people would say?" "She's not just some girl," Ryan argued. She's not one of us," his mother interrupted. "And she never will be. I won't have her ruin everything your father and I built." Her words cut through him like glass. For years, Ryan had done everything his mother wanted. Studied what she chose, dated the women she approved of, lived the life she planned. But now, for the first time, he wanted something different. Someone different. And that terrified her. That night, Anna packed her things quietly. Mrs. Clarke had made it clear her services were no longer needed. She left a short note on the counter. "Thank you for everything. I'm sorry if I caused trouble." When Ryan came down the next morning and found the note, he felt the world collapse around him. He tried calling her, but she didn't answer. He drove to the small apartment address listed on her employment form, but she was gone. No forwarding address, no message, nothing. Just silence. Days turned into weeks. The mansion felt emptier than ever. Even Mrs. Clarke noticed the change in her son. He stopped attending social events, ignored business calls, spent hours staring out the window as if waiting for something that wouldn't return. But love, when real, has a strange way of finding its path again. One evening, months later, Ryan stopped by a local farmer's market, something he hadn't done in years. He walked among the stalls absent-mindedly until the smell of something familiar caught him off guard. Warm bread, fresh pastries, vanilla and cinnamon, the same scent that once filled his mother's kitchen. And then he saw her. Anna stood behind a small wooden stall with a sign that read, "Anna's Hearth." Her hair was tied up, her apron dusted with flour, and her smile, that same gentle, real smile, lit up her entire face. She looked different, freer somehow, but still the same girl who once filled his lonely mornings with warmth. Their eyes met. For a moment, the world went still. Then, slowly, he walked toward her. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice trembling. He smiled, that quiet, broken smile she remembered. "I've been looking for you." She laughed softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I didn't think you'd want to find me. I never stopped." And there, surrounded by the noise of the city and the scent of fresh bread, something long lost found its way back home. But this was only the beginning, because while love had found them again, the world they came from was still waiting, with all its rules, its judgment, and its chains. And Mrs. Clarke had not yet said her final word. The sun was dipping behind the city skyline when Ryan and Anna finally sat down at her little stand. The street was alive with laughter and chatter, but around them, everything felt still, as if time itself had stopped to listen. Ryan watched her pour coffee into 2 paper cups, her hands still graceful and steady despite the storm that had once torn them apart. "You really did it," he said softly. "You opened your bakery." Anna smiled, a trace of pride warming her eyes. "It's small, but it's mine. Every loaf, every muffin, every smile that walks away from this table, it feels real." He nodded, feeling something stir inside him. Admiration, longing, maybe even guilt. I should have fought harder for you. You did, she said gently. But your world, it doesn't make it easy, does it? He looked down, tracing the rim of his cup. No, it doesn't, but I'm tired of living by its rules. Her gaze softened, but she said nothing. She'd heard promises before, not from him, but from life itself, which had a cruel way of offering dreams only to take them back. Still, seeing Ryan again, she couldn't deny the warmth that returned to her chest. That quiet, unspoken truth that they had never really stopped belonging to each other. As they talked, a soft drizzle began to fall. Ryan helped her pack up, their hands brushing more than once. The simplicity of it, folding the cloth, locking the crates, covering the bread, felt more intimate than any grand gesture could have. When everything was ready, she looked up at him and asked quietly, "So what happens now?" He hesitated, glancing at her modest van, then back toward his sleek car parked by the curb. Two worlds, side by side. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I don't want to lose you again." She smiled faintly. "Then don't. It should have been that simple. But love rarely is." The next morning, Mrs. Clarke was waiting in the living room when Ryan returned home. She sat perfectly straight, dressed in her immaculate gray suit, her hands clasped around a teacup she hadn't touched. "I heard you were seen downtown yesterday," she said calmly, her voice like ice over glass. Ryan froze for a moment, then met her gaze. "I was with her." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Mrs. Clarke placed the cup down slowly. "Ryan, we have discussed this. That girl. Her name is Anna," he interrupted, his voice firm for once. She blinked, surprised by his tone. "Fine, Anna. Whatever you call her. She doesn't belong in our world. She's using you. You think she cares about you? She cares about the life you can give her." "That's not true, isn't it?" Mrs. Clarke leaned forward slightly. "You've always been kind, idealistic. People like her see that and take advantage." "She's not like that," he said, anger rising in his chest. "You don't know her." "I know enough," his mother said coldly. "I know what happens when people from her world try to climb into ours. It ends in scandal, pain, and regret." Ryan stood up, his voice low but steady. "Maybe the problem isn't her world, Mother. Maybe it's ours." Her expression faltered just for a second, a flicker of something like fear, but she quickly regained her composure. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," he said, turning toward the door, "but it's mine to make." He left before she could say another word. That night, Ryan showed up at Anna's tiny apartment with flowers and the kind of nervous smile that made her heart ache. They cooked dinner together, simple pasta, laughter, no servants, no expectations. Felt like freedom. Over the next few weeks, they built a quiet rhythm. Dinners in her small kitchen, morning walks before sunrise, stolen kisses in crowded streets. For the first time in years, Ryan felt alive. He was learning what happiness looked like when it wasn't wrapped in perfection. Anna's bakery began to grow. Customers loved her warmth, her kindness, the way she remembered every face. Ryan helped her build a small website, even invested in better equipment, though he insisted it was a gift, not a favor. But peace never lasts long when it threatens power. One afternoon, Anna received an unexpected visit at the bakery. Mrs. Clarke herself walked in, her presence sharp and commanding. Every customer seemed to fall silent as she approached the counter. "Mrs. Clarke," Anna said quietly, trying to steady her voice, "what are you doing here?" The older woman smiled, though there was nothing kind in it. "I came to talk, privately." Anna led her to the back room, heart pounding. Mrs. Clarke looked around with mild disdain, her manicured fingers brushing against a tray of freshly baked bread. "I'll admit it smells nice," she said. "You have talent." "Thank you," Anna replied cautiously. "That's why I'm here," Mrs. Clarke continued, lowering her voice. "You seem like a reasonable girl, so I'll be direct. Leave my son alone." Anna froze. "Excuse me? You heard me. I'm not here to insult you, but to save you both from something painful. You don't belong in his world. You'll only get hurt." And if you care about him, truly care, you'll walk away before that happens. Anna's hands trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed steady. You think I want his money? His name? I think you want a life you can't possibly imagine, Mrs. Clarke said. Ryan was raised for a certain kind of future, one you could never fit into. You'll always be the outsider, Anna. Always the girl who came from nothing. And when the world turns cruel, you'll blame yourself for ever believing you could stand beside him. Anna swallowed hard, tears welling up despite her effort to hold them back. You're wrong about me. Maybe, Mrs. Clarke said softly, but you're not wrong about the world. Then she left, leaving the scent of her expensive perfume and the echo of her words behind. That night, Anna couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the conversation, twisting every sentence into doubt. She loved Ryan. She knew that. But was love enough to survive everything his family, his world, would throw at them? When Ryan showed up the next morning, smiling as if nothing could touch them, she broke. Ryan, she said, her voice trembling. Maybe your mother's right. He froze. What? She's right. We come from different worlds. This was beautiful, but maybe it can't last. He reached for her hands, but she stepped back. Anna, don't do this. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You deserve peace. You deserve your life. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. You're the only thing that's ever made me feel like I have something to lose, he said, his voice breaking. She closed her eyes. Then let me go before it hurts even more. He stood there, helpless, watching as the woman he loved walked away once again. And this time he couldn't stop her. Weeks passed. Anna buried herself in work, while Ryan tried to convince himself that distance was protection, not pain. But neither could silence what their hearts already knew, that love doesn't fade just because life demands it. Then, one evening, a story broke on the local news. Clarke Enterprises was under investigation. An old business partner had betrayed the company, causing massive financial losses. For the first time in decades, the Clarke family name was on shaky ground. Reporters swarmed, stocks fell, and Mrs. Clarke, once the picture of control, began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. Ryan tried to hold everything together, but the pressure was immense. Board members whispered that he wasn't strong enough, that his mother's arrogance had made enemies. He barely slept, barely ate, until one day when he walked into Anna's bakery again, not as a man from another world, but as a man who had finally lost the one thing that kept him chained to it. She looked up, startled. Ryan! He smiled faintly, exhaustion in his eyes. Everything's falling apart. She came around the counter and took his hands without hesitation. Then let it, she whispered. Maybe it needed to, and for the first time he believed her, because sometimes life has to break before it can be rebuilt. The Clarke mansion had never been silent like this before. The echo of the servants' footsteps was gone. The faint music Mrs. Clarke loved to play in the evenings no longer drifted through the halls. What remained was the heavy stillness of a place that once felt untouchable, now fragile, almost human. Ryan stood in his father's old study, papers scattered across the desk, phone calls unanswered. The empire that had taken generations to build was now slipping through his hands. His mother sat in the corner, her posture still perfect, though her face betrayed the first signs of defeat. They've frozen our assets, Ryan said quietly, his voice rough from exhaustion. If the board doesn't approve the restructuring plan by next week, Clarke Industries will be bankrupt. Mrs. Clarke didn't respond immediately. She simply stared at the rain outside, her reflection pale in the glass. Your father built this company with integrity, she said at last. He would never have allowed this. Ryan's chest tightened. Then maybe he shouldn't have left it to people who care more about appearances than truth. Her eyes snapped toward him. Don't you dare blame me for this, Ryan. I'm not blaming you, he said, his tone controlled but cold. I'm blaming the life you forced us into, the one where image mattered more than people. Mrs. Clarke rose, her composure cracking. Everything I did for you. For this family. He shook his head slowly. "You did it for control, Mother. And look where it got us." The silence that followed was heavy, unbridgeable. Later that night, after another round of phone calls that went nowhere, Ryan drove aimlessly through the city. The streets blurred past him in streaks of neon and rain. Somewhere deep down, he wasn't thinking about business anymore. He was thinking about her. He found himself pulling up outside Anna's bakery without realizing how he'd gotten there. The lights were off, but the faint glow from inside told him she was still working late. He stepped out, the cold rain soaking through his coat, and knocked gently on the glass door. Anna looked up from the counter, her face lighting with surprise and concern. She hurried to open the door. "Ryan? You're drenched." He didn't answer. He just stood there for a moment, staring at her as if trying to breathe again. Then, finally, his voice broke. "I didn't know where else to go." Without another word, she pulled him inside and locked the door. The warmth of the bakery wrapped around him. The smell of sugar and bread, the faint hum of the oven. All the small human things that made life worth living. She led him to a chair, fetched a towel, and knelt to dry his hands. "You're freezing," she said softly. He watched her, a lump rising in his throat. "I think I've lost everything, Anna." She looked up, meeting his tired eyes. "No," she whispered. "You've just lost the things that were never really yours." Her words struck something deep within him. For the first time, he felt the strange peace that comes when you stop pretending. He stayed the night, sleeping on her couch. When morning came, sunlight streamed through the small bakery windows, catching the dust in the air like tiny sparks of gold. Ryan woke to the sound of her humming, the smell of freshly baked bread filling the room. For a brief, sacred moment, he imagined what life could be. No mansions, no headlines, no weight of expectations. Just this, just them. As the days passed, the world outside grew harsher. Clarke Industries continued to fall apart, and the media swarmed like vultures. The once celebrated family was now a symbol of greed and downfall. But amid the chaos, something beautiful began to grow quietly in the ruins. Anna stood by Ryan, not out of pity, but love. She never asked about the company or the money. She asked if he'd eaten, if he'd slept, if he still believed in himself. And slowly, with her warmth, the man who had been crushed by a world of luxury began to heal. One evening, as they closed the bakery together, Ryan looked around at the small space. The laughter of customers, the scent of pastries, the photos on the wall. "This place," he said, "feels more like home than any mansion I've ever lived in." Anna smiled. "Maybe because here, no one pretends to be someone they're not." He took her hand gently. "Do you ever wonder if we were meant to meet? That somehow all of this, even the pain, was leading here?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I don't know about fate, but I know we had to break to learn what love really means." They stood there, hand in hand, as the world outside kept turning. Indifferent, busy, loud. But in that small bakery, time seemed to stand still. Across the city, Mrs. Clarke was facing her own reckoning. Alone in her grand house, she sat in the dark, surrounded by silence. The calls had stopped coming. The people she once entertained no longer returned her invitations. The life she had built on power and prestige had vanished overnight. And for the first time, she had to face herself. Not as the matriarch, not as the symbol of success, but as a woman who had loved control more than love itself. On the table beside her was a newspaper. The front page read, "Clarke Industries declares bankruptcy." Below it, a smaller headline caught her eye. "Local bakery wins hearts with warmth and hope. Meet Anna Clarke." She froze. Anna Clarke. The article showed a photo of Anna standing outside her bakery, smiling with quiet confidence. Ryan stood beside her, holding her hand. Something inside Mrs. Clarke broke open. The anger she expected didn't come. Instead, a deep, unfamiliar ache spread through her chest. The next morning, she called her driver. "Take me downtown," she said softly. When she arrived at the bakery, Anna was serving customers, her smile as radiant as ever. Mrs. Clarke stood at the door for a long moment before stepping inside. The bell above the door jingled, and Anna looked up, startled. "Mrs. Clarke," she said carefully. "I didn't expect." "I know," Mrs. Clarke interrupted. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling in a way Anna had never heard before. "I came to see for myself." Anna stood quietly, unsure whether to feel fear or compassion. Mrs. Clarke glanced around, at the walls decorated with children's drawings, at the warmth that filled the air. "You built this," she said. "Without him?" Anna nodded slowly. "At first, yes, but then with him." Mrs. Clarke's gaze softened, though her eyes were wet. "You've done something I never could. You made my son happy." Anna blinked, stunned. "I thought I was protecting him," Mrs. Clarke continued, "but all I did was cage him. You set him free." For the first time, the older woman's voice broke completely. "And I don't know how to thank you for that." Anna felt tears rise in her own eyes. "You don't have to thank me. Just let him be happy." Mrs. Clarke nodded, her shoulders shaking slightly. "I think it's time I learned what that really means." As she turned to leave, the bell above the door rang again, and Ryan stepped inside, holding a box of pastries. When he saw them both, he froze. "Mother!" Mrs. Clarke smiled faintly through tears. "You were right, Ryan. Maybe the problem wasn't her world. Maybe it was mine." He stood there, speechless, watching as his mother, the woman who had once ruled his life with iron will, reached out and gently took Anna's hand. It was the beginning of something new, a fragile peace, a quiet forgiveness. And for the first time in years, the Clarke family wasn't built on perfection. It was built on love. The days that followed were colder than any winter Ryan had ever known. The house that once smelled of cinnamon and laughter now felt like a museum. Silent, polished, lifeless. Anna had left 2 weeks earlier, and yet her presence lingered in everything. He could still see her reflection in the kitchen window, hear her soft humming when the sun first rose. The emptiness gnawed at him like a wound that refused to heal. His mother noticed, of course. Mrs. Clarke would walk past him at breakfast, her pearls glinting in the light, her face unreadable. She told herself she had done the right thing, that she had protected her son from a mistake that would ruin his future. But every time she looked at him, she saw the hollowness in his eyes, and for the first time in years, she began to question whether her wealth and pride had cost her something far greater. Ryan tried to drown himself in work. He met investors, managed properties, smiled for cameras. But none of it mattered. He would come home late, loosen his tie, and walk through the quiet halls like a ghost. Every night he sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames, remembering the way Anna's hands had trembled when she said goodbye. He wondered where she was, if she was safe, if she still thought of him. Anna, meanwhile, had found refuge in a small town on the outskirts of the city. She had rented a tiny room above a bakery and found work in a modest restaurant. The pay was small, but the people were kind. Yet even there, surrounded by the comforting rhythm of ordinary life, she couldn't escape her memories of Ryan. She had promised herself not to cry anymore, but every time she smelled rosemary and lemon, the ingredients she'd used to cook his favorite dish, her eyes burned with tears. At night, she wrote letters she would never send. Letters that began with, "Dear Ryan, I hope you're well," and ended with, "I miss you more than words can say." She folded them neatly and kept them in a small box beneath her pillow, as if the paper itself held a piece of his heart. Back in the city, Mrs. Clarke's conscience began to stir. One afternoon, she visited the kitchen to speak with the new cook, an older woman named Marjorie. The woman smiled politely, but the warmth that had once filled the room was gone. There was no music, no laughter, no scent of freshly baked bread that seemed to welcome her son home. It was just ordinary. Mrs. Clarke stood there, hands clasped, and whispered almost to herself, "I didn't realize how much life she brought into this house." Marjorie looked at her curiously. "You mean the young woman who worked here before, Anna?" "Yes," Mrs. Clarke said softly. "That's her." Marjorie nodded. "Sweet girl. I met her once at the market before she left. She had kind eyes, the kind that make you feel seen." Those words pierced Mrs. Clarke deeper than she expected. That night, she sat alone in her study, surrounded by portraits of her ancestors. People who had built empires, ruled with strength and discipline. But for the first time, she wondered if all their pride had simply been another word for loneliness. The next morning, she found Ryan at the piano. His fingers brushed the keys, but no melody came. Just scattered notes that sounded like broken thoughts. "You loved her," Mrs. Clarke said quietly, her voice trembling. Ryan didn't look up. "Still do." She swallowed hard. "I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I was protecting my own fears." Ryan's hands stilled. He finally looked at her, not with anger, but with a deep sadness. "You took her away because she didn't fit your world. But she was the only part of it that ever felt real to me." Mrs. Clarke's eyes filled with tears. For years she had believed love was something you could control, shape, refine. But looking at her son now, she understood. Love wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to be true. That night she couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she went to Ryan's room and placed an envelope on his desk. Inside was an address, a small restaurant in a coastal town, written in her delicate handwriting. She didn't leave a note. She didn't have to. When Ryan found it the next morning, his heart pounded. It was as if the world had come alive again, color rushing back into the gray. He packed a small bag, grabbed his car keys, and left before sunrise. The drive felt endless. The road stretched between him and the woman who had taught him what love really meant. With every mile, he rehearsed what he would say. "I'm sorry. I should have fought harder. Please forgive me." But when he arrived at the restaurant, his courage faltered. He saw her through the window, her hair tied back, wearing a simple apron, her eyes focused as she plated food. She looked peaceful, beautiful. The sight of her hit him like a wave. He stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed softly. Anna turned, her hands stilling. For a moment, they just stared at each other, two hearts suspended in time. "Ryan," she whispered, disbelief in her voice. He took a step closer. "I didn't come to take you away from the life you've built. I just needed to see you, to tell you that I never stopped loving you." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why are you here now?" "Because I was a coward before. I let fear and pride win. But not this time." He smiled, voice breaking. "If there's even the smallest part of you that still loves me, I'll wait for you, as long as it takes." The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of rain outside. Anna looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same sincerity she'd fallen in love with months ago. The boy who had once been shielded by wealth now stood before her, stripped of everything but his heart. She wiped a tear from her cheek and said softly, "I never stopped loving you either." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was thick with everything left unsaid. Then, slowly, she walked toward him, her hands trembling. He reached out, and when their fingers touched, it felt like the world exhaled, as if even the universe had been waiting for this reunion. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, but inside that little restaurant, everything felt warm again. They didn't know what the future would bring, whether her mother would ever truly accept their love, whether they'd ever fit into each other's worlds. But for that moment, none of it mattered. They had found their way back to each other. And sometimes that's all love really needs. A second chance, and the courage to take it. The rain continued through the night, tapping softly against the restaurant windows as if it were blessing what had just been mended. Ryan and Anna sat together at a small table in the corner, their hands intertwined, both afraid that if they let go, the other would disappear again. The world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the warmth of their laughter. Quiet at first, then growing freer, as if they were rediscovering the sound of happiness. When the restaurant closed, Anna led him upstairs to her modest apartment. The room was small, barely enough space for a bed, a table, and a single chair by the window, but it felt more like home than the mansion Ryan had grown up in. He looked around, humbled by the simplicity. A few books stacked by the bedside, a potted plant leaning toward the light, and on the dresser, the little box of letters she'd never sent. She noticed his gaze and hesitated. "I wrote to you," she said quietly, "almost every night, but I never mailed them." Ryan opened the box gently. Inside were dozens of folded papers, some creased with age, some stained by tears. He picked one at random, unfolding it with trembling hands. The letter was short, the handwriting neat but shaky. "Dear Ryan, today I made your favorite dish again. I can't eat it without missing you. I hope wherever you are, you're smiling." He closed his eyes, the words striking deeper than any wound. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. Anna shook her head. "It's not about deserving. It's about love. It doesn't ask who's right or wrong. It just wants the truth." He took her hand again. "Then the truth is, I can't imagine my life without you." They sat together in silence for a long time, the world quiet except for the rhythm of rain and heartbeat. The next morning, Ryan woke up early. The sunlight crept through the curtains, painting her face in gold. For a moment, he just watched her, peaceful, content, and realized that all the things he'd been taught to chase meant nothing without this, without her. But as joy returned, so did the weight of reality. He knew his mother's influence still loomed large. Mrs. Clarke might have given him Anna's address, but that didn't mean she was ready to accept them. Ryan couldn't let their love exist in hiding forever. He had to face the woman who had once broken both their hearts. Not with anger, but with truth. That evening, he told Anna his plan. "I have to talk to her," he said. "Not just for us, for her too. She needs to understand that love isn't weakness." Anna hesitated. "Ryan, what if she still doesn't approve?" "Then I'll still love you," he said simply. "Because my life isn't hers to design anymore." A few days later, Ryan drove back to the city. The mansion rose in the distance, tall and cold against the morning sky. As he entered the gates, a familiar ache returned, the memory of lost laughter, of silent dinners, of walls that had seen too much pride. Mrs. Clarke was in the garden when he arrived, pruning her roses. She turned at the sound of footsteps, her expression softening when she saw him. "You found her," she said quietly. "I did," Ryan replied, "and I'm not losing her again." Mrs. Clarke sighed, setting down her shears. "I thought love could ruin a life, that it could make you weak, unfocused, ordinary. But I see now it's the opposite. It makes you human." Ryan took a step closer. "Mother, you were never wrong for wanting the best for me. But the best isn't always built on money or status. It's built on meaning, on love. Anna showed me that." Mrs. Clarke looked down, her lips trembling slightly. "She reminded me of someone," she said after a pause. "Your father. Before the money. Before everything changed." Ryan blinked, surprised. "You loved him that much?" She smiled sadly. "More than I ever admitted. He was a teacher when I met him. I came from money, he didn't. My parents hated it. And when they threatened to cut me off, I let fear win. I left him. I told myself it was for the best. But I spent my life wondering what might have been." The confession broke something inside him, not out of anger, but out of understanding. All this time, she hadn't just been protecting him from love. She'd been protecting herself from reliving her own heartbreak. He reached for her hand. "It's not too late to do what's right." Tears welled in her eyes. "Bring her to me," she whispered. "Let me meet the woman who made my son believe in love again." When Ryan returned to the small town with that message, Anna could hardly believe it. "She wants to meet me?" He nodded, smiling. "Yes, and I think she wants to apologize." A week later, they arrived at the Clarke estate together. Anna's hands shook as they walked up the marble steps. The grandeur of the house was overwhelming. The chandeliers, the paintings, the silence that echoed through the hallways. She felt out of place, like a shadow in a world that had once rejected her. Mrs. Clarke stood waiting in the sitting room, dressed simply, her face softer than Anna remembered. When their eyes met, the air seemed to hold its breath. Anna spoke first. "Mrs. Clarke." "Anna," the older woman said gently, "thank you for coming." They sat across from each other, and for a long while no one spoke. Then Mrs. Clarke broke the silence. "I owe you an apology. I thought I was doing what was best for my son. But I see now that I was only repeating my own mistakes. You didn't deserve the pain I caused." Anna's eyes glistened. "I forgive you," she said softly, "because I know how hard it is to let go of fear." Mrs. Clarke's composure faltered. A tear slipped down her cheek. "You remind me of who I used to be before pride changed me. And I think maybe it's time to start over." Ryan watched as two worlds that had once collided now began to heal. It was quiet, humble, and deeply human. The kind of forgiveness that didn't erase the past but softened it. Later that evening, Mrs. Clarke invited Anna to cook dinner. Together they moved through the kitchen like old friends, laughter slowly filling the spaces where tension once lived. When they sat to eat, Mrs. Clarke raised her glass. "To love," she said, "the only thing that truly survives us." Anna smiled. Ryan reached for her hand under the table, and for the first time Mrs. Clarke didn't look away. That night, as the city lights flickered outside, Ryan realized something profound. Love wasn't just about finding someone to hold on to. It was about learning to forgive, to grow, to heal what was once broken. But the story wasn't over yet, because what none of them knew was that fate still had one more surprise. Something that would test their hearts, and ultimately, prove that true love doesn't just survive obstacles. It transforms them. The weeks after that evening felt like a gentle unfolding of life. The mansion was no longer cold and unwelcoming. Mrs. Clarke had begun to change, her pride tempered by the humility of her own mistakes. Ryan and Anna spent long afternoons in the garden, tending roses side by side with her, laughing at stories she shared of a youth spent chasing dreams she had once abandoned. The house, once a fortress of control, now felt alive, not because of wealth or status, but because it was filled with love, forgiveness, and hope. Anna's bakery continued to thrive. Ryan had invested wisely, not to control, but to support her passion. Together, they created something that belonged to both of them, a life built on their shared dreams, not the expectations of the world. The city began to notice the small miracle. A young woman, humble and kind, whose heart had touched the richest man in town and even softened the hardest of mothers. One sunny afternoon, Ryan received a call from his lawyer. The words were simple, but their meaning was anything but. "Mr. Clarke, there's an inheritance matter you need to address. It concerns Anna." He blinked, confused. "Anna? What do you mean?" "It appears," the lawyer said, "that your father left a portion of his estate specifically in her name. It was never revealed before. Legally, she is now co-owner of part of Clarke Industries Holdings." Ryan's heart skipped. He looked at Anna, who had been kneeling by the window arranging flowers. "Anna," he whispered, unsure if the moment was real. She turned, eyes wide. "Co-owner." He nodded, laughter and tears mingling in his voice. "Your hard work, your kindness. It's more than recognized now. It's protected." The news felt surreal. All the struggles, all the heartbreak, all the distance and fear had led them to this moment. Anna's eyes glistened as she looked at Ryan. It changes everything." Ryan shook his head. "No, it doesn't change anything between us. That's already ours." Later that evening, the three of them, Ryan, Anna, and Mrs. Clarke, sat in the garden, the air warm, the sky painted with streaks of orange and violet. Mrs. Clarke reached out and held Anna's hand. "I can't promise I'll always be perfect," she said, "but I can promise that I'll never stand between you two again." Anna smiled softly. "That's enough, Mrs. Clarke. That's everything." Ryan took her hand, feeling the pulse of the life they had rebuilt together. He realized something profound. Love, patience, and forgiveness could transform even the coldest of hearts. And in their unity, they discovered a strength far greater than wealth or power. In the weeks that followed, Ryan and Anna returned to the bakery regularly, hosting small gatherings where laughter, stories, and warmth filled the air. Mrs. Clarke often joined, baking alongside Anna, sharing lessons from a life she had once ruled with iron. Their bond deepened, forged not by convenience or obligation, but by understanding, compassion, and shared history. One morning, as the city awoke to the soft golden light of dawn, Ryan stood at the bakery's door with Anna. He took a deep breath, the familiar scent of bread and flowers filling his senses. "You know," he said, voice quiet but full of certainty, "I never imagined I could be this happy, and it's all because of you." Anna smiled, her eyes glinting. "You didn't just find me, you found yourself along the way." He nodded. "And I'll never let go again." Mrs. Clarke appeared behind them, smiling faintly. "Life has a way of teaching lessons," she said. "Some of the hardest are also the most rewarding. I see now that love, true love, is the greatest inheritance of all." As they watched the sun rise over the city, Ryan felt a deep sense of peace. The challenges, the obstacles, the doubts, they had all led to this. And in that moment, he understood what real wealth truly meant. A heart open to love, forgiveness, and second chances. Together, they faced the world, not as a young man and a humble woman divided by class, nor as a mother fearful of losing control, but as a family united by trust, understanding, and unbreakable love. And for Ryan and Anna, the future no longer felt uncertain, felt endless, bright, and filled with possibility. Because sometimes, the greatest surprises come not in riches or power, but in the quiet moments where hearts truly connect. And so, the story ended, not with a dramatic triumph or a grand gesture, but with a simple truth. Love, courage, and forgiveness have the power to transform lives, rebuild worlds, and turn even the most impossible beginnings into the happiest endings. The city moved on outside, unaware of the quiet miracle that had unfolded within the walls of a small bakery and a once grand mansion. But for Ryan, Anna, and Mrs. Clarke, the world had never felt more alive. They had discovered that the heart, when given a chance, can always find its way home.